welcome to the monthly podcast of the Pell Center. I'm Jim Ludes, Executive Director, joined today by our friend and faculty fellow, Martha Rose. Martha, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Jim. I'm happy to be here.
So you have had a remarkable career in higher education. You've been the first dean of the education school at Johnson & Wales University. You've been a faculty member here at Salve for more than a decade. Did you spend some time teaching yourself?
Yes, I began as a high school teacher in Providence.
Yeah, and what's the transition like going from being a high school teacher to a university professor?
Well, it's probably not quite as much of a leap as you think. There's certainly no lunch duty, so that was kind of great. But people think essentially in similar ways, and so maybe the content is ramped up a bit, but still there are basic ways that people learn, and teachers have to find those.
Do you think you're a better professor having spent time working in a high school in terms of, this is what my complaint as I was getting my PhD is that I had no formal instruction in instruction.
Yes, right.
And I think most PhDs don't.
Right.
You have.
I have. Most PhDs don't, but I think I have to because I am a professor of education in the teacher preparation business. So not only do I have to share with my students the theory and pedagogy, but I have to model it well. So in order to teach them to be excellent teachers, I always have to be one myself. That keeps me sharp.
So in the time frame from in the arc of your career, the respect that teachers in the classroom, I'm thinking principally sort of K through 12, the role that teachers play in society has, I think, in my view, been diminished by sort of a persistent level of criticism. Am I wrong in thinking that?
I think it's an interesting point, and I know people often voice it, but I like to think of education really as being part of the fabric of our culture. And look at the rest of our culture. Almost every job is treated in a less respectful way. All authority figures have lost that same sort of respect. So yes, that's true of teachers. However, I privately will often hear parents praise teachers, thank teachers, talk about how they've turned children's lives around. So I think that basic business of impacting children is as important and valued today as it ever has been.
Well, it's interesting. It's the difference between the sort of broad generalization that people will often talk about. All politicians are crooked, right? But my politician he's a great guy. He gets me. He's there at the whatever. It's the difference between the general and the specific.
That's right.
It's an interesting phenomenon.
And it's also financial. Whenever people's pocketbooks are squeezed, they look for ways to alleviate that pain, and often it looks like education. Education's a funny job because people do think that they can do it because they've sat in the seats.
Everybody's been a student.
Right. Everybody's been a student, and it looks pretty easy, and it looks like there's a summer vacation. And there are moments when it is that easy, but much of the time it's quiet, hammering away, making sure kids have better lives.
Yeah. Making sure kids have better lives. Mm-hmm. So that's a big mission. Mm-hmm. When you think about the role, principally of public education, what role should it play in society, and is that the role that it currently plays?
Well, the role is pretty traditionally respected in that it prepares citizens to become part of the civic culture. And I think that we continue to do that. But as the years have gone by and the world has become so much more inclusive and diverse, it often takes much more planning and thinking about how to prepare students who have such varied backgrounds and abilities to enter into civic engagement. I think it's the role. Are we doing it well? I think we're hammering away. I think we in places they're doing it beautifully, and in other places they can learn from those models.
Yeah, It's interesting. So we're sitting here today. It's primary election day in Rhode
Yeah.
Island. You're wearing your "I voted" lapel sticker.
Modeling.
But I am. I just literally came from a lunch with the League of Women Voters of Aquidneck Island, and one of the things we talked about was the lack of civic education in public schools today. And it's not unique to Rhode Island. It's pervasive across the country, and some of it has to do with high stakes testing. Do we over romanticize the idea that there was a time when we did civics education well? And if so, what do we need to do it right? And if that's not over romanticized, how do we get back there?
It's interesting how very often people say things like it's not being done well, and I think it's being done differently. And certainly there are gaps. We want our children to be much more engaged as they grow up than they have been in this more recent generation. But civic engagement means being part of the community. And there's much more involvement with the community in public education now than there was a generation ago in terms of community service. Little children from K to, not all little, K to 12, really do think of community service as being part of their curriculum. Let me give you one example that I think is really quite interesting. As I mentioned, I'm a professor in the special ed department here at Salve, and we are preparing teachers to become special educators. As they're student teaching, we require that those students, our candidates, develop lessons so that their children with disabilities perform service in their schools. Very often children with disabilities have been recipients, and they are always taking and receiving help. But this is a very empowering lesson for them.
Exactly the word I was thinking of.
Yes, and they are out there performing service. And so in that way, the civic engagement is much more powerful than it was when I was learning about the three branches of government.
Right. Is there, so is that a unique characteristic of the Salve?
I think it is. I think Mercy Empowers is our motto, and that is part of being a Salve teacher.
Yeah.
And when we recruit and the students come in early and freshmen and they're so excited, we say, only stay if you are promising that you will teach all children, that all cultures are important, that you have to address children of all cognitive abilities, and that you will teach them to become better citizens of the world. And that's our plan.
Now, you have a special interest in autism and educating students with autism.
Yes.
What are the unique challenges that a teacher working with a student with autism faces?
This is a very interesting and difficult challenge for families and the students and teachers, and will become more so in higher education as the students grow up. Currently, the CDC says that 1 in 86 children is born on the spectrum. And the spectrum is wide, so it looks different for a lot of different students. But there are some characteristics of ASD that are pretty uniform: difficulty with social interaction, difficulty with interpersonal skills, and repetitive behaviors. Think about that in a classroom situation. Classrooms are so social, are looking for students to collaborate, we are trying to get children to work in teams, and this is a challenge for students on the spectrum. Yeah. It does not work to say that this is the wrong behavior, because this is their behavior. So we have to teach the students who come to us, and we have to teach them well. We have to find out how they learn. It's our jobs to reach out to the different students.
Is it a unique preparation that a student is a unique preparation that a university student who wants to be a teacher, working with special needs students, working with autism students, is it a unique preparation that they receive, or is there something unique about that person who wants to teach those students? Is it a little bit of both?
I think it's almost neither. When we are teaching our candidates to become good at inclusion, we're giving them a set of tools and strategies and ways of managing behavior and things like that. And they are armed with this bag of tricks. But inclusion is the law of the land, and these are their students. And so any teacher should be open to any student, and it doesn't mean that the teacher is special. It means that the teacher is a true teacher.
That's a powerful statement. So when you think about the big challenges facing education today, what are you worried about?
I'm worried about the next wave of classrooms. They are going to be populated with many English language learners. That requires an interesting set of skills, and we are working now to try to give that to our candidates. But that
what would those skills be? Would they just
they would be emphasizing the visual, trying to label everything in the classroom, use diagrams. But as you can see, they fall short.
Yeah.
There are going to be many children in many different languages. Most recently, I'm sure the statistics have changed since I was more familiar and worked more closely with Providence Public Schools, but I remember a few years ago that there were 52 languages spoken at Central High School every day.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of teachers knowing another language.
Yeah.
You can't know it.
You can't know that many.
No.
Yeah.
So that's the next big challenge.
From a public policy perspective, are politicians keeping pace with what their expectations are? Are their expectations in the right place in terms of those challenges, and are they providing the kind of, I guess, resources that these schools need and the people in these schools need to be able to succeed?
Some states are doing better than others.
Yeah.
And of course, the states where there are largest immigrant populations are closer to getting it right. Massachusetts recently has required that their new candidates pass a module or a test, or there's some kind of credentialing for becoming ESL teachers.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and there's even more for inclusion in English only classrooms.
Yeah.
And my wife is a educator in Massachusetts and had to do that training a couple of years
Oh,
ago,
she did.
and I was surprised by. It's not like just kids move to town at the start of the school year.
No.
Like they're there in August and
Right.
then they're there.
Yeah.
They're doing high stakes testing next week, and students are still registering, and they have to be included in that testing, even though they've spent 3 days.
Days. That's
yeah,
right.
3 days, literally.
Yeah.
But they still have to be tested.
Yes.
What do you think about the sort of the rise of testing over the last 25 years? Good for education, bad for education, mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag. It's good for some high-risk populations. So as a special educator, I'm glad that we're being more accountable for how our students with disabilities learn. And also for children of poverty, various populations of students are being watched more closely than they were. But that's about the best benefit I can identify. It certainly has taken the wind out of the sails for teachers. It's really made much more regimented that which they must share with their students.
Yeah. Do you, it's 2016. Have you been, what's your take on the way the political candidates have talked about education or not talked about education?
Well, it hasn't really been the topic that it has been in the past, has it?
Yeah.
It's surprisingly missing. My hope is that it's no longer a side issue, but it's becoming part of the general considerations. Let me give you an example. This week, there's an article in the Atlantic Monthly which refers to old, really watershed research by Hart and Risley about students' acquisition of words. And pretty much that research said kids in high poverty know the fewest words, kids in middle class situations more so, and kids of high income levels know the most words. And of course, words are power.
Right.
And so that seems so complicated. But I loved the way this article ended. It said that, sure, it would be great if we taught more kids more words, but that's not all. Mostly we need to find their parents better jobs. And that's just right, because parents aren't able to spend enough time with them to be available for more language exchange. So it's complicated.
And you raise an interesting issue, because the socioeconomic stratus or strata of within schools and the link with outcomes. We've looked at this from the university's perspective. The decline in middle class incomes, the really the stagnation in those incomes is creating a gap between the super rich and the rest. And there have to be consequences in education as a result of that.
Right. I think Newport is a very interesting place to look at that. Because there's such a dichotomy of wealth in Newport, and most of the richest children are not in the public school.
Right.
They're in the private school, and so that's a frightening trend. Here we are, a small microcosm, but there's one elementary public school, and the rest of the kids are there.
Yeah.
So that's we have to really we have the opportunity to really look at that and to see what the consequences of that are.
Yeah. And what's your sense of that link between? Well, so if we take it to an extreme, when we talk about the role that poverty plays, forget about just sort of like, middle class, lower middle class, but real poverty. If you want to fix the schools, do you have to address poverty?
Yes. Jeffrey Canada's work in the Harlem Children's Zone.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the way we have to go. We have to develop a much broader net and better supports. And yes, we have to look. School can't be the isolated institution it has been. It has to be part of the day of a family. And in that's a much broader responsibility and opportunity.
Why did you decide to teach?
Oh, it's funny. Decide almost seems like it was an intellectual choice. For me, teaching is a vocation, right? I can't imagine a more joyful life than I have had in this career. And I think teaching chose me.
A joyful life in this career. I see the glee in your face when you talk about your students and when you talk about teaching, and I'm reminded of the clerk from Chaucer. We're both Providence College grads, so we're well versed in the greats. But Chaucer described the clerk by saying, "Gladly would he learn and gladly teach." Yeah. And I see that in you. Yeah. And enjoyed this conversation, and I'm grateful to you for taking the time. And this is Martha Rose. She is a professor here at Salve Regina University, a faculty fellow here at the Pell Center. Thank you so much for being with us, Martha.
Thank you, Jim. My pleasure.
And join us next month for the next podcast from the Pell Center. Thank you.